Okay. Hi there, fifth hour. So, what I realized for the piecewise function Khan Academy is that they are throwing you some questions that are not common, but they're still good questions. So here we have a piecewise function. At 0 is where the function switches from a sine function to a linear function. So we're transitioning from using graphs to using algebraic expressions today. So what we want to do is we want to write this piecewise function in its algebraic form. And so in Khan Academy, they're going to give you the piecewise function looking like this. Sine x times pi and x over 5, and then they're going to give you some domain restrictions. So this is from 0 to -8. So -8 is the small. So -8 less than x less than 0. And the linear function is from 0 to 10. So this is for 0 less than x less than 10. I think maybe there might be some equal signs here, but it really doesn't matter. So the really common question is to ask for the limit at this location here, where the two functions switch over. So for us, that's 0. So the really common question is, what is the limit as x approaches 0 of f of x? Okay, and because it's that transition point, because we see that transition point right here, okay, in our piecewise function. So graphically it looks like this, but algebraically it would look like this. There's that transition. That means we need to do a left hand and a right hand limit to find those algebraic y values. So my left hand limit means approaching 0 from the left, or the littler values, is going to look like the limit as x approaches 0 minus, that's from the little values, of f of x. And what that means, if I'm approaching from the little values, that means I'm approaching like this. I'm approaching 0 from those negative values. So I'm on the sine function. So that means I am evaluating the sine of x times pi, and x is 0. So 0 times pi. And of course, 0 times pi is just 0. And so we need to evaluate the sine of 0, which equals 0. So that was my left-hand limit. My right-hand limit means I'm coming to this location. Graphically, it means I'm coming from the right, or the bigger values. So algebraically, the way we see that is we're going towards 0 from the bigger values, or from the right. So that's the limit as x approaches 0 from the positive side, or from the larger values of f of x. And that means if we're approaching from values larger than 0, that means we're in this domain, which means we're on this function. So that means we're taking the limit as x approaches 0 from the bigger values of x over 5, which is going to be 0 over 5, because we're going to put the 0 in for x. And just like our discussion at the beginning of the class period, 0 over any number is 0. So since these match, then we know that the limit, this overall limit, as x goes to 0 of f of x, yes, we have a match here, is in fact 0, because we've checked it from both sides. So that's the really common question to ask with piecewise functions. You see that almost exclusively. You'll always see a piecewise function, and they want to know what's happening when it switches from the top to the bottom function. Okay, but Khan Academy is also taking this and using it to ask questions either here or there. In other words, they're using it to ask questions in this domain or in this domain. And when that happens, it just turns into a normal limit where you don't have to check both sides. So for instance, Khan Academy might ask you, what is the limit as x approaches -1/2? Well, -1/2 is right here. And that is on the sine function. The line's got nothing to do with that. So if we want to know the limit as f of x approaches -1/2, we come up here and we say, well, wait a minute, -1/2 is here. That means we are on the top function. So we want to know the limit as x approaches -1/2 of sine. Now I'm going to plug in my x value. -1/2 times pi. Okay, now -1/2 times pi is also -pi/2. So if you remember your unit circle, I'm going to turn my back here, but here's my unit circle. Here's 0. This is pi/2 straight up. -pi/2 is down there at the bottom. Okay, and the sine value down at the bottom is -1. So this limit is -1. Okay, in other words, as I approach -1/2 here, I'm approaching -1 on my graph. But I can find that algebraically. I don't have to have the graph. So they could ask you that question. Or they could ask you a question dealing with this function. Like, for instance, they might say, what is the limit as x approaches 5? Okay, as x approaches 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What is my limit here? And in that case, the way we see that algebraically is that 5 is in that domain, and that domain is on that function. So the limit as x approaches 5 of f of x is going to be the limit as x approaches 5 of 5/5, because I'm going to put the 5 in for x, and that is going to equal 1. So the answer to that question would be 1. So Khan Academy, although the focus of piecewise function is usually based on this type of question, where you have to do a left hand and a right hand limit. Okay, this is the left hand and the right hand limit. Sometimes Khan Academy might just ask you to work with the top or work with the bottom function in a single limit sort of calculation. So hopefully that helps you with the piecewise function, Khan Academy.